Well, I wanted to share a little bit about how I do the walls and insulation and paneling. So for today, I'm just going to do a brief overview of each area and talk about kind of the methods that I use to do those things. The ProMaster has sort of obvious wall paneling structures already to it. And so the OEM paneling that you can get from RAM is meant to fit on the walls. And so then if you look at the walls and study where those panels go, you can more easily make your framing for your van conversion to use not as much depth. For instance, the main pillar right here, I don't come out all the way to fully cover that pillar. I want to save those extra few inches, and so in this case, I cover it with closed cell foam and then a four-way stretch fabric. The lower areas, basically the lower half of almost all the areas in a ProMaster van is very easy to have about 2 inches of insulation. So I use polyiso foam. 1 inch is typically what I buy. I also have some 1/2 inch that I use, but that way it can contour to the surface a little bit better. It has a slight bow to it. If you go with the 2 inch, it's too thick, and then it sometimes isn't able to install. But 1 inch works pretty well. And then you use gaps and cracks spray foam. Let's see, where do I have? Oh, here it is. So I use the big can, the Pro Series, and have what can't remember what you call this, but anyway, the application, the Pro adapter will allow you to have a lot more control over exactly where you put it. And there's a lot of corners that you especially don't want to be excessive on. It's super important to not fill any of there's wall reinforcements that if you put the spray foam inside the reinforcement, it expands and it actually warps on the outside of the van. You can see it distorting things, so you have to be real careful about those. So any of the areas that's quite flat and smooth, you can use this polyiso foam, and then once you've installed it, so you hold it in place with a tool that, I mean, you can use lots of different methods, but I have found that this hydraulic jack is like super helpful, because I can, no matter the location, I can find an angle that I can adjust this jack to, for instance, and then expand. Okay. And then the last final adjustment is this, and so I can adjust it all the way to the wall, hold something in place, and be very careful about its position. So it's like, well, let's see, that it actually would be better if it was up 1/2 inch or down a little bit. So no matter whether you're working in paneling or anything on the ceiling especially, these jacks are super helpful. There's all different kinds. I'm not advocating any one specific kind, but this method is dramatically helpful to be able to have an accurate installation of whatever you're working on in the van walls. So then I make sure that all the areas are covered as much as possible with the polyiso foam. These areas is one of the most awkward spots in the van, this angled area, and so I actually mount a 2x6 with plus nuts, so it's very securely anchored. But then that allows you a flat surface that you can put your finished paneling, go all the way across this, and not have to deal with the strange contortions of that. Then the other thing that I do is take pine. So I buy a bunch of 1x6 pine, and for most of the work that I have, if I split it about in half, so 2 and something is common. So I screw the pine to the ceiling, I screw it to the wall, in any of these places where it would be ideal to have that be the surface of the paneling. So for instance, down here, the lower walls, I use 1/2 inch plywood, and I fill the insulation first and then cover that wall with the 1/2 inch plywood. It's almost rectangular. There's very little adaptation that needs to be done, so that can be screwed to the wall other than the wheel well. Same thing through in the front where the driver's side is, or on this passenger side here. So all those areas I can bolt the 1/2-inch plywood to it. Then I put a little bit of paneling, 1x3 on top of that, and then create these perimeter structures that then are only losing like 3/4 of an inch. And even then, because of the bulge out here, for instance, there's very little loss of depth in the wall by doing the framing this way. So by screwing these to the metal, I use metal stud screws. So they're self-piercing but metal stud screws, and those are able to sink into the pine and are real secure. I haven't had any issues with even them coming loose. But then that makes it more ideal to then put the final paneling on top. So by putting this piece right here, for instance, this paneling that I'll show you in a second can cover just barely over the edge down here where the previous panel is. It comes up, and I shoot for about halfway on this, and then the next piece of paneling would go from there all the way up to this piece. I've added an extra extension on this so that it's just a slight angle there, and then from there, then there's a paneling that will go across all of this, one continuous long, so that it's able to adjust to that tapering in the wall. But other areas that are difficult, hard to get to, then I use Thinsulite to fill cracks and corners and not try to hassle with the solid foam. But any of the large, flat, smooth areas then can be covered with the polyiso foam. And especially when you glue it to the wall in a perimeter pattern, and then it's securely push it in tight, then basically you've prevented moisture from getting on the backside of this if you do it well. So I take 1/4-inch paneling, and I screw that over the wall, and then I have templates for a lot of different things, but one of those is the spacing on the screws, and I decided to use an 8-inch space. And so I can cut this template. It's the screw holes are 8 inches apart and 3/8 of an inch from the edge. And so then I use that as my guide, holding it to the edge of the paneling, and then be able to know that my holes are lined up and I'm drilling them 8 inches apart. That allows me to secure things well. Know I've got enough uniform spacing of screws. I need to add the screws that will go right around the window frame. But then, like for instance, when I first cut this out, there wasn't an opening for the window, and so I used a router to you first drill a larger hole in the opening somewhere, close to the edge, but not right on the edge, and then use your router to go around the entire edge nice and cleanly, and it matches up the opening perfectly with your paneling. It's like a great way to make sure that you've got an exact opening, especially once you've aligned up everything else on your paneling. So I'll be doing, I think there's 14 total panels in the whole van, so everything will be cut to size and shape, and make sure it fits well and all the screws line up with all the locations. And once all of those are finished, basically I install all of them to make sure that they fit just right. Then I'll take all those panels off and install 1/8-inch foam. I'll glue 1/8-inch foam to every panel, and then every panel will be covered with Marathon tweed fabric. And so that way, all that phase will be, I'll probably cover that in a different video, but so then the finish piece looks really polished and completed, makes a nice interior for a van build. A lot of vans have the Marathon tweed finish. And so I think that's all for today. Thank you for letting me share a little bit more about CampMaker.com.